Hello and welcome to another episode of Give Me Five, the interview show all about creators and their influences. I'm your host, John Campbell, and my guest this episode is the multi-talented Mishelle Apalategui, who is an accomplished actor, writer, and director who I have the honor of co-starring with in the Tesla City Stories, which I've mentioned more than a few times on here and will continue to probably mention quite a few more. But Mishelle is on the show because she's premiering a brand new solo show this month, which is entitled HR, the Final Directive, and that is part of the Stage Fright Festival here in Portland, Oregon. Let's take a listen to the trailer.
No, this meeting couldn't have been an email. Indulge in your worst nightmare. A mandatory meeting with the head of HR. Now that the country has taken its final form as a corporation, its unhinged HR director is dying to drag you through a sinister and unexpected PowerPoint presentation in HR, the Final Directive. Not into gore? Try corporate horror. Written and performed by Mishelle Apalategui, with a soundscape by Chris O'Toole, this solo show is part clown, part immersive play, and totally corporate approved. Welcome to the team. Only 3 performances at the Stage Fright Festival in terrifying Milwaukee, Oregon. Go to stagefrightfestival.com for tickets.
You can catch Mishelle in HR, the Final Directive, October 6th, 12th, and 13th at the Chapel Theater in beautiful Portland, Oregon. Check the description below for a link to buy tickets. So without further ado, here's Mishelle Apalategui to Give Me Five. Mishelle Apalategui, welcome to Give Me Five.
Hi, it's good to see you.
You as well. Right off the bat, I said, how badly do people mispronounce your name?
I've had some really good ones over the years, but I think one of the most disappointing is when I was like in elementary school and I had this awesome librarian named Mrs. Peacock.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great librarian name.
Yeah, and I envied her. She had like a big beehive, and like the glass. I mean, she was just classic.
Yeah.
And I read the most books that month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of even just messing up my name, she just changed it to Applegate.
I can't say this, so here's an easier name.
And I was like, oh. But it's been, it's usually like Apalategui or Apalategui or just, Apala, help me, please.
It is one of those that once you hear it pronounced, they're like, oh, yeah, of course.
It's actually fairly phonetic, yeah. I mean, at least how we know how to say it.
Yes,
you might need to go check in with my Basque ancestors, but I don't know.
I do, yeah. Is there some kind of feud in your family about, we say it like this, and we say it like this?
No, but I'm sure there is somewhere.
And then, of course, I'm sure you also get the Mishelle misspelled, too, because it's not spelled the traditional way.
Yeah, but that's also my fault because I do that for life separation purposes.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. Makes sense.
That way, my government name is for strictly government W-2 purposes.
Gotcha. All right. So, Mishelle, as always on the show, we have people come up with lists of 5 works that inspired them. Now, you actually have written 2 different lists of 5. Which is a first on this show, but that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it kind of goes to show where my brain is because you sent me the instructions, and currently because I am in the middle of like getting the final bits of a solo show that I'm doing together, that is what is just on my mind at all times. So I wrote down 5 different things that inspired that specifically.
Right.
And then I looked back at it and was like, oh. Okay, did not finish reading that sentence.
There's no wrong way to interpret it. I do want to say that. Like that's a totally fine way to interpret it. But you have lists, so you have a list for
I have multiple lists.
Yeah, for what inspired specifically the show that you're on here promoting, and then just you as an artist in general.
Yeah, which unfortunately that's like so many things. So,
I always say this, like it's a thing where it's like it's just 5 things. It doesn't have to be a top 5. They don't have to be in any order. Some people go through them chronologically. Some people, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But, like I said, there's no ranking to this. There's no right or wrong answers. I try to make this as easy as possible for people. It's a
fun thing to think about just generally, because one of the things that I noticed for me is, unless it's specific to, like I said, like a piece that I'm working on or something that I have that I'm mulling over in my head to create
Mm-hmm.
into my own piece, the stuff that inspires me, I don't always realize it until later, right?
That's some of my favorite stuff on the show is when people go like, "Oh, wait, that is like a huge influence." Or one of the whole ideas behind the show is I love having people on and talking about how you can work in some medium but take influence. I love having a comic book writer on who's talking about an
Yeah.
album that inspired them or all that kind of stuff. That's why I'm always like, it's clear, like it doesn't have to just be, you're working in theater, so these are 5 pieces of theater. Or anything
Yeah.
like that. So let's start with you know what, let's go. This will be a give me 5 kind of 2-parter, and we'll go back and forth between the list. So let's start with something from the just general things that inspired you.
Um, well, in general, I would say probably one of my top ones is The Rite of Spring.
Mm.
Do you know about The Rite of
I
Spring?
don't. That was a that was a total broadcaster.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. But please do enlighten us what that is.
Well, The Rite of Spring is like a ballet and concert work
Oh, okay.
by Stravinsky.
Okay, I mean,
And
I know the name.
yeah, your average person probably knows a little bit about it because they heard at some point that there was like a ballet that was so upsetting and controversial in the turn of the century that people rioted and
Right.
were just, and like people went mad and like tore their clothes and screamed and rushed the stage and all that kind of stuff. And so ultimately my fascination with it is, one, it's an amazing piece of music, which our contemporaries would probably remember it from Fantasia,
Okay, yeah.
the dinosaurs.
Yes.
Um,
I was going
it's
to say
very
that's
intense.
probably
I mean, that's not the whole thing, but that's
right.
pieces of it. It's very,
Yeah.
very intense, and it's really beautiful. But yeah, in 1913, the Ballet Russe company did like this original choreography to the music by this choreographer, Jinsky. I think I'm saying that correctly. And had, and it was just so different and not what Paris ballet was. And it's really fascinating because you just kind of, it's the reason I'm so inspired by it is because it's, the piece in and of itself is one thing, but like the cultural phenomena and like the echoes that had happened since is so fascinating to me. Like, how do you create something that is so intense that 100 years plus later people still like do little podcasts about it and be like, did you know?
Well,
It's really, really fascinating stuff.
It's something I think is so fascinating about art, right? Is that something that can be viewed by probably people like, oh, it's an old ballet, that's old and stodgy. But as you're talking about, like, yeah, in its day it was radical, right?
It was really radical. And what's interesting even further to me about it, which it kind of taught me and reminded me that especially being somebody who's a theater artist, in a lot of ways you feel very resigned to doing your thing once and then being able to let it go and it will never happen again. And that is the magic of theater. And, in some ways I really love that. In other ways, I also really like how theater or performance in some way that is not recorded does live on in different ways. And this one in particular, obviously there was no recording of it. It was 1913.
Right.
But there was at one point a woman who was in her like 80s who was in the original production. And in the 80s, she tried to remember it. And a bunch of people, I think I want to say at the Joffrey, came together and tried to help her remember the steps. And they did it by drawing her movements.
That's awesome.
And then they staged it. And since then, it's been like redone lots and lots of times.
Yeah.
With the quote unquote original choreography.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not like a script where it'd be something that you can just, we can have the Shakespeare plays and their words, but the choreography.
yeah, that it gets kind of lost, you know. That's why a lot of dancers I know, they record themselves, you know, like,
Right.
so you can go back and get it perfect. But it's especially with like the vocabulary of somebody who's like a choreographer, unless it is similar to a very traditional style of ballet, a lot of these steps were not traditional, so they didn't have names,
Right.
right?
Yeah. You can't just go do that thing because it was so radical at the time. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. So it's very interesting. It's a really fun rabbit hole to go down to, and there have been many a night where I couldn't sleep and I would just watch a recording of the production that they did. I think in 80 something. I can't remember. It's in pieces on YouTube, and it'll get taken down and then it'll get put back up, and you
Yeah.
know. But
It should be
I
out
love it,
there.
and it's really intense, and the costumes are really weird, and it's very Russian.
Okay. You know what? That's a pretty good descriptor, actually.
It's
Very Russian.
that's what I was thinking. It was extremely pagan, so it's
Oh,
about
okay.
pagan uh, myths and pagan like cyclical nature of life and death. So
Yeah.
it's that was also part of why it was so
Oh,
because it was
sure.
not, you know, very Christian,
Yeah.
which, as we know, is just so awful.
You just can't. You just can't with that. All right, let's take something from the list of that inspired this show specifically.
Have you seen the TV show Severance?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so I think that at this point now is out. I think in 2022 or
I know we've
three.
been
It's
waiting
been a
for
while.
forever for the second season of
I
Severance.
mean, in
Yeah.
our the way that our brains think now, it's been forever. But
Right. Yes. Yes. That's the thing too. Yeah. It was on last week. What are you talking about? No. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I
It's been
have,
a couple years now.
yeah, I love that
It's
show.
an amazing show.
The first episode, I was like, who got in my brain? What are they doing in there? I have spent a lot of years listening to, working in, creating, and being a part of a lot of like very strange, absurd, and uncomfortable theater. That's things that I really enjoy. Not inaccessible though. And
Ah.
I think that was the thing about Severance that I really liked, because one of the things that I love about the types of stories I like to tell is that, similar to Severance, there's this larger, if you just want this larger, strange story, and in this case is a little bit dystopian, but also maybe not so dystopian,
Right.
and is playing on a lot of our like smaller day-to-day fears versus like a huge disaster or something like that. You can just kind of follow that larger plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really, what I'm more interested in is the duality of that, along with like the intimate stories between people when all of that shit is happening.
Right.
Um, and that show really influenced the last few pieces that I've done. But especially this one, because I've delved into what I'm calling, because I'm not that I made it up, but it's my corporate horror.
Yeah.
So there's these two things I've been playing with: the idea of corporate horror and intimate apocalypses, which are, like things that are just going to happen every single day within the larger thing that we have no control over, and kind of the terror in that more so than just like a slasher or something large and looming.
Right.
Because you kind of get to rest your laurels a little bit sometimes here and there, and I think that's really scary.
Totally. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
completely different, like you're saying, type of horror that is still as visceral. But yeah, I don't really, I can't really put myself in the shoes of somebody at a summer camp being, potentially hacked apart. But the idea of the sort of loss of your, metaphorical soul or sanity inside this, corporate, and everything on that show is so brilliant, from the production design to the way the lighting shifts into that harsh, artificial office setting, versus the sort of more, low lit, very realistic outside sequences. Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, and like the idea, one of the things that I like about it too is that more and more as I've gotten older, I've started to be a little bit more forgiving of myself in how creations of mine come to fruition. And by that I mean that, like, I've always known that there's no new stories to tell, but
Right.
at the same time, like, you still in the back of your mind are like, I'm gonna find that that one, I'm going to be the
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
right? And then you hear someone else talk about something and you're like, wait, oh, shoot. And I've started to be a little bit more like, hey, that means I'm on the right track. That means that, like.
Yeah. I've come to take comfort in the idea that there's no new stories, because it's sort of, you're unshackled from it. I was in a screenwriting class once where everyone in the class, there was such a thing where it's like, I had this idea, but it's too much like this other movie, and enough students said that eventually the instructor was like, stop doing that. You're never going to write anything. Just write a thing. It'll be different because it's you writing it with all of your perspective. So who cares if it's like kind of like Star Wars, It won't be, because I think that the emphasis is on the person creating it more so than is there a new kernel of an idea in it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's how I felt about Severance, is that like it had so many things in it that we've seen before and that we know, and including things just in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
And just the idea of like being able to, since the main conceit is that like, the characters that we follow have their brains literally severed by a chip, where outside of the actual physical building, they are their normal quote unquote selves.
Yeah.
And inside the building, they are the innies, or like the workers who literally only ever are aware that they exist while in said building in their cubicle.
Yeah.
And, that idea is not necessarily new. And it's one of the things that I had been wrestling with myself, as far as like just being an artist and also being a little bit of a weirdo, and spending a lot of time trying to make art, and then realizing that since I don't come from means, I still have to work. And so what do? You do what a lot of people, I think, in my situation do, is you find the work that you can do, that you can give as much as you need to it. And then that way, hopefully you have something left for the stuff that you want to do. And even trying to do that, it's not easy.
Right.
And so in a way, this idea of being able to like separate those two things feels so novel and exciting.
When I heard the pitch for the show, like you said, even though it's like we've seen kind of things like that and in science fiction, stuff like that, but it was still just like, ooh, that's a good idea. Like that's just, and the idea of like, well, that would, like, at first you kind of go like, oh yeah, well that would kind of be ideal, right? Because then but then the deeper you get into it, the more you're like, actually, it's a horrific concept.
Yeah, and we forget how much our bodies remember who we are. Like even if we take our mind out of the equation, right? Like there's things that get put into ourselves that just are never going to come out.
That's a huge thing I'm obsessed with, particularly in science fiction, is this idea that you can't suppress the individual. Like one of my, if I was to do this list, which is not, people are here to watch you, I know, so save the comments. But like one of my favorite movies of all time is RoboCop, which I know. But like the whole thing in that though is, you can try to take this guy's humanity away and make him this robot, but like it's always going to eke through the trauma, the emotions, the humanity is going to break through all the corporate programming. Very different tones, but kind of similar subject matter, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, and now people who listen to all the stuff I do will be like, oh, take a drink. John mentioned RoboCop. Let's go back over to your other list then and pull something from that.
Okay. When I was a teen, the band Radiohead came out with Kid A.
Oh yes, of course.
And I had already been a fan. I remember when I was in middle school and high school, I was the only girl in the group of girls that I knew who listened to them, and I was very weird for it. So it was kind of a secret. But when Kid A came out, I remember I was way into like the music scene. I was a total like little scenester kid, and that's all we did is we went to shows. And I remember there were whispers of oh, but did you know that like they're doing a listening party, which is not like anything new necessarily. A lot of like record stores would do listening parties.
Right, right,
You go to the Tower, they do a listening party before they sold the tickets to a show when you actually had to go to a place to buy tickets to a show.
right.
But with Kid A, it was at the IMAX theater, which meant that something else was going to happen.
Right.
And there was some really great that era of like last couple of years of 90s into the early 2000s was so interesting with a lot of marketing, because like similar Blair Witch, right?
Right.
Those two things I'd say kind of in tandem just because they're similar years.
Yeah, the
And just that like
word of mouth really
the
using the
word of
audience.
mouth thing, which was
Yeah.
so cool.
Before it felt like now
And
the like viral marketing is so we're so aware of it that it becomes like okay, yeah.
yep. So we all lined up outside of the IMAX theater in Balboa Park because I'm from San Diego and that's where it was at there. And we just waited. We didn't know what was gonna happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, we just trusted the process. And I remember seeing a girl walk by from middle school and being like, wait a minute, you liked Radiohead too? Um we didn't really talk. We just did the like girl
Yeah.
like, hold on. But yeah, and then you got in, you found a chair, and they started to play the album, and it was all of what they called at the time the blips, and it was just rolling and ongoing, and they had designed the whole thing, to go with the whole album, and they just played it in full,
Yeah.
and it was what I assume people like when they go to see like Laser Zeppelin or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But for like my generation, so it was like cooler at the time.
Yeah, man. Lead
But
Zeppelin in the past.
yeah,
This is Radiohead, man.
yeah. I'm sure
yeah.
they do Laser Radiohead now, unfortunately.
It is interesting because I'm sure even just this story and young people today are like go to a theater to listen to an album.
Well, let's not be that mean. But
I
yeah,
know, but it is just
but
sort of like the idea of going to a physical place and also just indulging in an album as a singular thing. Unfortunately, feels like it's
yeah.
less so. Everybody's so into just the songs that they're into now, and the way music is presented to people. It's almost designed for that mindset.
Oh, of course. And that's hard for me because I'm somebody who wants to see something or hear something from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the suspense. I like the waiting. I like the not knowing. I know it can be very uncomfortable, but that was one of the things that whole process did for me. And it really stuck with me because I remember thinking like, hold on, I'm participating in something that is theatrical. This is not just you know, going to the record store and putting it in, my friend Willie's CD player and driving around town, not stopping to listen to it, which is what you normally do, which is also amazing.
Right.
But
It wasn't
like
passive,
it
right?
was
It
a whole
was
thing.
yeah, you were
Yeah.
active. And I feel like that's so much of the appeal and why Radiohead still has this mystique about them, right? They've always been really good at I'm sure they would push back, but like the idea of branding themselves or making themselves
Yeah.
it's some sort of thing. There was something different about them as a band, and yeah, they were really unique in how they would present stuff and themselves. That now, of course, they're so ubiquitous. It is bizarre to think about like, oh, they're like the old school guys.
Yeah, I know it's crazy because yeah, they've really solidified their place in music history, good and bad, like
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a thing, but I really am thankful for that experience because it really opened up my idea of like what a media can be. It's not just one thing.
Right.
A multimedia piece is really, really incredible. And, it's actually funny because now I'm going, oh shit, because the piece that I'm doing right now also is multimedia.
I was going to say,
So,
did that open you up to include that sort of stuff in your own creative works?
yeah, I just really started to embrace the idea of using multiple types of media. I didn't get to do it in practice. That was before I went to college, though, too. So I
Mm,
didn't really have a lot of vocabulary for anything.
right.
Um, and I didn't know that what I'd kind of discovered is something that had been around for a long time, which is the great thing about being, whatever I was, like 18.
Mm,
Um, but it was a point of reference. And I think that's that was what made it so special for me. And then later when I went to college and I had theater history and I learned about things like happenings, and I was like, oh,
Right.
like, okay, this makes sense, or guerrilla theater or any of it. Like it's not new, but it doesn't matter. It's how your little gateway into it,
Absolutely. Yeah, it was new to you, and it opened up your mind for that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Just feel free to jump between the lists now. Actually, we don't have to be rigid about this. There's no rules.
Oh, haunted houses.
Ooh,
Love
like
haunted
the
houses.
kind of Halloween attraction one sort of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, when I was living in Chicago, I fell into a group of theater practitioners who were like super influenced by haunted houses. I didn't get a lot of that growing up because my family was very religious, so it was very
Oh,
forbidden.
yeah.
The only type of like haunted houses I had ever really experienced were those like hell houses,
Yeah, and actually, I find those
which are
infinitely more terrifying.
way more terrifying. But yeah, so like I've always liked the spooky, and I don't think I really fully understood how much I did because until like in hindsight, when someone was like, "Oh, we're just gonna go to this haunted house," and it's at an old insane asylum,
Yep.
in the middle
Yep.
of a cornfield in the middle of Illinois,
Yep.
I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so we went to so many all the time, and I wasn't doing anything besides working in theater, so like I had the time to do that, and I started to become like a connoisseur, trying to go to every single one I could every year, and then also even the ones that are year round, because there definitely are ones. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting Christmas themed haunted house that goes year round in Illinois that's
Oh,
actually
I didn't know
quite
this.
good because they spend so much time refining it. I
Yeah.
can't remember what it's called, but
Interesting.
it's worth the drive. I don't know. Um, and again, it did that thing for me where I was like, okay, this is theater and this is just, immersion. It introduced to me some of my favorite aspects of theater that I'm not able to always do because I don't have things like my own space. So I'm
Right.
beholden to
Right.
rules. So, for example, one of my favorite things to try at least write into my scripts, even if it never gets actualized, is smell. Um,
Yeah. An of underutilized sense in most
yeah.
theater. Yeah.
And ultimately, so much of that just has to do with the fact that, a place you're renting is going to be like, here are all the things you can't do, and that's usually one of them is
Yep.
like, you can't set fire to something. Okay, you can use
Right.
some stage blood, but only over here,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or whatever.
And fair, but
Yeah.
also lame.
Um, but the other thing that I lean into that definitely can be used, which is sound.
Oh yeah. I
Um,
mean, being people who know me from my other stuff, I am something of a horror enthusiast in film in particular, and that's the key to the whole thing. It's always the
mhm.
sound design above all else. Really, I feel like in the horror or eerie gothic genre or anything like that.
Yep. Well, and as being an actor, there was always somebody who was like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Can you just like be in it for, you know?"
Yeah.
And I also dated plenty of people who were DPs or in college for
Yep.
film in some way. And oh, we need to do some tests. We need to do this. Oh, can
Mm-hmm.
you come play this part?
Yep.
And when you do that as an actor, you really, really start to appreciate the difference in magic in things like horror when you're doing it live versus when it's on film, and
Mm.
how successful you can be on either side, but they have to be completely different things. And I really, really got into sound because I also just love music and I just know how much it like moves me in general. And soundtracks to things are
Yes.
very moving also without the pictures, right?
Right.
So it really manipulates us in a way um, that is sometimes almost undetectable.
I mean it's an interesting thing. Our mutual friend Brendan Jones and I always talk about this. 'Cause I'm a huge movie score nerd, and we go to a
Yeah.
lot of movies where I go like, God, that score is amazing, and he just doesn't. He always talks about if it's really working, I'm probably not noticing it.
Yeah.
It's an art form that's kind of designed to be invisible. And he always says, and I think it's true. He goes, I only really notice it when it's really good or really bad.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah. So no, I think that the atmospheric nature of it is accurate, but like also reductive at the same time when you call it that, because yes, when you isolate it and you do listen to a soundtrack, you're gonna be like, oh my god, this is incredible. This is a piece of art unto itself, but its job is inherently to buoy another piece of art or another aspect of the medium.
Yeah, and it's like we've all seen those like redone trailers for like The Shining or whatever, and they like turn it into a comedy or romance
Yeah,
or whatever.
it's
And it's
mostly
like
music. Yeah.
that easy. And that's what was so interesting to me, because I was like, it thinking about sound also helped me as like as far as an actor goes too, because you have to find a place where you can be interpretable. I don't know.
It
I feel
sounds
like
it
it's a word.
sounds right to me. Yeah, it sounds right.
To an audience no matter what. And I think playing in the grays or in the beige of like commitment to what you're trying to do works fine if you have a bunch of sound. If you
Mm,
don't have something like that, which you typically don't on stage, especially when you're trying to just make a few bucks and you get into like your local Shakespeare just to make
yeah,
some money for the summer, you are usually either outside
right.
or in a black box that somebody rented, and they usually get to choose. Either they have a lighting designer or a sound designer, and usually lighting goes first. So,
Yeah,
like there's something to like knowing that you have to, as an actor, also bring the sound, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Um,
No, I mean that is an interesting thing. I do think about that as you say that. I go like, I don't see outside of obviously like musicals or something like that, a lot of theater that uses a lot of sound to it. It is mostly
yeah.
just you. I do think of always just sort of if people aren't talking, there is just sort of this dead quiet in a lot of
Yeah.
theater.
And I think it bothers me. And I think that it is something that can be so easily remedied. And I think also that there's been a lot of times in my life where I've written a piece with sound in mind, and even said, especially for things like you submit,
Right.
like a short festival or something. And I will put like, here are the sounds. And sound is a really easy and affordable way to create bigger atmosphere and cheaper than like sets.
Right. And yeah, exactly. That does conjure. I mean, we both act in a live radio show here in Portland,
Right.
and you think about that. The whole show is just us standing at microphones, maybe with some minor costuming and like an image of a location behind us. It is mostly the sound,
Yep.
our voices included, but all the sound around us that create whatever image is in people's heads. So yeah, it is. I think it's also in indie film. It is one of the biggest things where I was like, if we just anything I've done in like festivals is like, if we just put the time in on sound, we're gonna be in the upper 1% of these movies because so many people are
Yeah.
just like, I don't know, it sounds fine.
Yeah. Or they'll just, yeah, I know. And there's so much restriction too, because, you can use some of the free stuff, which there's plenty of now, but it all
Oh,
sounds like a reality show. So,
yes, yeah. I've done enough now that I'm like, I know where that came from. I
yeah.
know I know what free site you pulled that from. I know what program that was a
Yeah.
preload in or
Well,
whatever.
I'll tell you what, again, relating back to the show that I'm working on, the sound that is being worked on for that right now, I have an incredible sound woman. Her name is Chris O'Toole. I've worked with her for many, many years in different things. And every time I do something now, I send her the script and I say, "Hey, will you design the sound for me?" And so this piece is going to have elements of exactly that. Of this sounds familiar, but I don't think it's what I think it is,
There you go.
which I think will be really, really great. I'm actually haven't quite heard all of it yet, so I'm very excited to hear it.
Well, and that's also awesome
She's awesome.
if you have a collaborator that you can
Oh,
consistently work with, who
yeah.
that what a ease of mind that is to know like that person's got it. I have this idea, but I know they're going to execute it.
I don't even have to worry. She's always on it. And there have been
Yeah,
times where it's completely different than what I thought, but it didn't matter
yeah,
because it worked sometimes better,
yeah.
like it's great. It's great.
I'm always amazed at people who have a very specific, because it's like I act and direct and write, but that's all sort of like nebulous things. But people who can zero in on, people who are great at lighting, people who are great at sound, and you just go like, oh man, you're thinking about things I never would because I'm looking at this, big picture.
Yep.
All right, what else you got on the list?
Okay, so I'll kind of merge a couple of these
Sure.
because it makes sense too. But because of I'm really into like cultural ephemera. So like a lot of the stuff that maybe you aren't paying attention to explicitly, but
Mm-hmm.
like you're going to absorb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays there's even more of it because of social media and everything. So the way that happens now is through things like influencers, and like influencers now are like a huge bubble of, or like a umbrella of a lot of different things, right?
Right.
And some of the things that I'm really interested in is how somebody becomes like an influencing like life coach, TED talky, MLM selling,
Mm-hmm.
persona, but they still have to act like they still
Right.
have to like be a character, and those characters is what I'm really interested in, because nobody's going to listen to somebody try to sell them a piece of plastic if there's not something that's interesting about them, although I have been wrong before, but there's a lot of people that actually will. But
Right. Yeah.
but when you think about it, it's just so similar to like in the old days, the old days, when an extremely like prominent celebrity was in their elder years, and then they just start selling stuff,
Yep.
right? In between your,
The
soap operas during the day.
the Orson Welles
Exactly.
commercials. I've gone down that YouTube rabbit hole, a number of all the outtakes and stuff on that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I know it still happens, but
Yeah.
like, and then because you have a lot of like actors who just like become spokespeople. And what's interesting to me about that is like if you were an actor before, you were probably known for like roles.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of carve that persona out with like all the different roles that worked,
Right.
right? Like the roles that people really responded to. A really good example of that I was actually just reminded of recently was Jennifer Garner. Like
Mm.
she's an actress who's been in a bunch of stuff, but she really carved out her like way of being seen by doing like a bunch of mom things.
Yeah.
And then like, and she's not an embarrassing mom. She's not a cool mom. She just kind of is. And she like figured out this like
Yeah.
personality persona where she's just pleasing, right?
Yeah.
And kids like her and adults like her and moms love her, and
Mm-hmm.
she's selling you a Capital One card,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting. So that I see the trajectory. What's fascinating to me is, some 25-year-old from, Tennessee or whatever, coming up with something that then they're able to like whittle away at, that then becomes a persona that then they have to really hone.
Right.
And it's kind of our current like motivational speaker, right? Like, who is this person? Who was this person before, right?
Right.
We have no idea, and yet we like trust their word. We don't have all of that information that we do about like Orson Welles and Jennifer Garner.
Right, because like those people, it's happening in reverse order, right? Like those people are going, I'm already known for something. Oh, I think there's a way to then be, the spokesman for this thing. Where you have people going like, I almost, I mean, especially like motivational speakers, like I'm the brand. I'm selling you me. I'm not Jennifer Garner selling Capital One cards. I'm me selling you me, and that you should listen to me. I mean, I anytime I see those people, I do have that thought about like, why should I listen to you? You're not a doctor or anything I recognize as like, it's just like, hey, I got it. I know what's up.
Yeah, and a lot of times they pretend to be something that they're not.
Yep.
So
They just put on a white lab. How many people just put on a white lab coat and you're like, you must be a scientist of some sort.
a lot of times, there are the ones that they actually did just want to be actors.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then this is what ended up happening, right? Or they wanted to be musicians, or they wanted to, do something similar in the entertainment world, and then they saw an in. And you know what? Hey, but I mean, hey, except that I also don't want to be sold something that might harm me, slash pretending to be like a guru or some sort of like spiritual leader
The
or doctor.
Yeah, that line gets blurred real quick. I mean, how many cult documentaries and stuff start with
I mean,
that
it's
sort
so
of.
fast.
Yeah,
It's so
and
fast.
there's a reason that so many of them are in Hollywood, and yeah, people are failed
Yeah.
actors or yeah, musicians or whatever.
And I think ultimately, like, what's intriguing to me about it is that they all have something that I don't have, which is fucking balls.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, yeah, no, that's fine. It's totally valid. You feel free to use whatever language you want, but
Just in that, like, there's that
yeah,
confidence, that like underlying thing that's like, I can do this. I
I
can completely just get on here and sell you this or be this person or pretend that I am this. And I
yeah.
just,
No, I don't have
whew,
that. I don't have that either. I can pretend if you give me a character to play, I can pretend to be that person.
yes.
But if I was just me, John Campbell,
Mm-mm.
I do this because it's like, well, yeah, I would be talking about monster movies and comic books anyway. But yeah, I couldn't just come out there and be like, all right, I'm me, but I'm this version of me. And then yeah, then you kind of do have to live it. And the thing that amazes me to this day, especially when it comes to these kind of people or TV personalities or anything like that, is that people are still surprised that it's phony. Like when something comes out
Yeah.
about people, and I'm like, really? Have we not learned that like people aren't the way they present themselves in pop culture? How are we still surprised when it's like, what do you mean Ellen DeGeneres is mean? How
Yeah,
could
or
it
like I heard
be?
one recently that I was like, I knew it.
Yeah,
That Jay Shetty guy,
yeah,
he just wanted to be a rapper, I think.
sure. I mean,
And
the
now he
heart.
marries people and is like a guru or whatever. But when you go to buy a ticket to his show, he
Mhm.
just like does stand up basically. So it's like,
The amount of people where it's like, yeah, I always think about this a lot of like the YouTube sort of people where it's like, I'm gonna tell you my political opinions, but also check out my album, and you're like, okay, well, I see where this was always going for you, that sort of thing. No, that is fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a somewhat new phenomenon. I feel like of it started with the reality TV people, and then it yeah turned into like the influencer stuff, where it's just like an individual being a brand is so weird now.
yeah. Well, and now it's understood, I think, a little bit more by your average person. Whereas like years and years ago, when I was living in Chicago, I was working at one of the jobs I had was working at this nightclub, and it was owned by this guy who was pretty famous at the time, and so like they wanted to test a reality show,
Mm,
and I remember just being like, okay, whatever. And I thought that they meant like, oh, we're gonna film while you guys work or whatever.
hmm
But then they like had me come into a room and like started talking to me. And as they're asking me questions, I was like, are you trying to get me to tell you that I'm the evil person or whatever? Like that I'm the foil, that like I'm so like, oh, so what do you think of the other girls, huh? Like
yeah,
you're
no,
really different from them, huh?
I
You're really
I
different.
I had a friend who was a cameraman on some of the like the TLC reality shows. I don't remember which ones exactly because they all blur together. But anyway, and he talked about it. It would literally just be like the producer just like, "Hey, come here. She just called you a whore. I just
Yeah,
heard her say,
exactly.
it's like,
And,
what do you
it was really
go?
funny because that was still kind
Yeah,
of early on with all of that. And I just was like totally blindsided. I was like, oh, right. I'm actually not an interesting person like to watch.
yeah,
Here's your drink. Please give me tip.
yeah.
Like
Because
I'm
it's like,
really,
let's be honest, 99% of what's happening in the nightclub is super boring.
so boring.
Yeah, it's just
Lots of like fumbling with cash,
yeah, they don't
We
want
didn't have
that.
tap money yet then.
No,
But yeah, so
how fast in the reality? I mean, like in terms of reality shows becoming a thing, how quickly did that turn into? All right, we've got to start goosing this. All right, this is like they had to be getting
yep,
footage back,
yep.
pretty quickly.
And now I think you can major in it.
I'm sure you can. I mean,
Like
I
as an
would.
actor, I mean, like you go in and
Oh
you learn to do it. Yeah.
boy, that's heartbreaking.
I
That is
know.
really sad. All right, hit me with something else.
Here's one for a little nostalgia too. Fairy tale theater. Rest in peace, my beautiful Shelley
Oh
Duvall.
yes, absolutely. We were of that generation that I mean that I knew her as that, and then discovered like the Altman stuff and The
Hmm.
Shining and things like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
she's one of my absolute favorites of all time because she was just so strange and so herself. Um,
I mean, complete
and
talk about a one of a kind. There's no,
Yeah,
you don't go, I need a
absolutely.
Shelley Duvall type. That doesn't exist. Like,
No. I mean, there's some people that can kind of like, I know people talk about Mia Goth kind of having a similar thing. And I think she does for like some aspects, like maybe
mm-hmm.
some of the horror aspect, but there was an aspect to Shelley that was just so very her. And again, it's that having a very particular persona that like some people are blessed with and
Yep.
are able to really nurture. And and she wasn't somebody who was really out to become some big star or anything. So, um, you know, that's why I love fairy tale theater so much, even in hindsight, because it was something she actually wanted to do. A lot of the stuff
Yeah.
she did over the years was because someone was like, "Oh, you should do this, and you'd be really good at it, or you are really good at it." And people, especially like with Altman, like she loved working with him,
Yeah.
and like, um, for all of the stuff that people talk about with her and Kubrick, like a lot of that is so misinterpreted. Um, she really enjoyed learning about how he worked. I mean, it was awful too, but
Yeah.
like she also would talk about it later down the line. Like I am my own woman. Like
It is interesting.
I know.
It is. It is always people being outraged for her more so than I ever heard her ever say anything about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Not that he's like the greatest guy to work for. I know.
oh no, no, no! I mean,
Like,
I've heard countless people have. I mean,
yeah,
I
but
think
yeah,
Nicholson was a little bit more like, oh, I'll tell you what it was like to work with.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so fairy tale theater, I think one of the things, so I was, when I was a kid and we would go to the Blockbuster and I would get to choose one thing and I had a lot of siblings, so everybody got one, right? And
Hmm.
I would choose one of the VHSs. And oh man, I guess the whole conceit of it, the whole device of her being like the narrator and just kind of inviting you in,
Hmm.
like a story theater type thing. It was theatrical, like it was very
Yes.
much done on like a set on a stage. So it tickled these two things that I was learning about in my life, which was the fact that I liked theater, because I didn't get to go to theater as a kid because we
Mm,
didn't my parents weren't into it and also we didn't
yeah.
have the money for that sort of
I
thing.
don't remember going to much as a kid either.
Yeah, it wasn't as accessible, I think. I think my first theater piece that I ever saw was at the library, and
Yeah.
it was a youth group that did The Emperor's New Clothes. And I remember sitting in the seat and I'm watching this whole thing and I'm just like, oh my God, these are teenagers like doing a show for me. That's so cool. And then at the end, he walks out and he was just wearing like polka dot boxers, to
Hmm.
like because it was for kids, so
Right.
it
Right.
was just
Right.
silly with like a wig or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember going, "Oh, I get it. Like I understand what this thing is about."
Yeah.
And I think the similar thing happened with Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater, where like she she had a very careful hand in the telling of each of the stories. She wasn't like trying to Disneyfy it. She
No.
wasn't trying to objectify the characters in any way. She was just finding really nice and interesting ways to tell the stories that have been told a whole bunch of times through her lens.
Yeah.
And I really took to that because these were things I knew.
Hmm.
I knew a lot of these stories, some of them I didn't. Um, and a lot of times when we play with fairy tales, people want to take them and like deconstruct them
Oh yeah.
or like put some sort of like really huge like metaphor or allegory that's not like even on top of the ones that are already there.
Right.
And sometimes, and I feel this way with Shakespeare too, like sometimes the simplicity in of what they are works best because it allows the audience member to then filter their own experience through it, and what they get out of it is what is personal to them,
Mm.
and I think she did that really with those pieces. They were simple, they were really pretty, they were theatrical, and then of course had all of like the movie stars. So my dad would be like, "Hey, that's
Yeah.
so it's now."
Well, that's the thing, and I think the fact that those people participated in that certainly spoke to how much love they had for her,
Yeah.
because nobody was making any money off of that. But
No.
oh no, and that was the thing about it was yes, it was theatrical. I think they also had no money, but it was a thing where they that was part of the DNA of it was this very much like, hey, let's just put on a show. And like, I do remember that was unlike anything else that was out there. I remember, yeah, I haven't seen those since I was, 5 years old probably, but they still stick in my memory, because it was different than anything else I saw.
Yeah, you see like Robin Williams squatting down like as a frog, like
Hmm. And everybody had that same level of commitment and earnestness that she did, in
yeah.
it.
And again, that's such a theatrical thing because like in theater, like you're using your whole body.
Hmm.
In film, you're using like the tiniest muscle,
Yep.
and both are very difficult.
Oh
But
yeah.
to do that also on film is really, really hard
Yes.
and and scary, you know?
Totally.
Like,
Yeah. And probably to, those people trained in both forms, very weird, very strange to try to use this skill set in this format that I'm used to turning off that part of my, performance ability. Yeah, that's a good
yeah.
pull. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, you
Uh
should rewatch them. They're fun.
yeah. Anything else? What do you got anything left?
I think the other thing that I wanted to bring up just because it's so fun for me for this show is that I don't know, did you ever see the movie Magnolia?
Oh my god, yes.
Okay.
I love that movie.
I feel like when I ask people that, they either go like, "Oh, I couldn't like I stopped it," what
Oh no, I
or
mean
yeah.
that you're hitting. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my top five just creative people in general. I think
Yeah, I
the
went through a
man's a
huge
genius.
P.T. Anderson phase.
Yeah,
But so Tom Cruise, who
yeah,
is already just an insane person,
yeah.
um, and he is not he's not one to shy away from his characters. His character in that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I spent a lot of time watching and rewatching his performance
Yeah.
to prepare for my piece because
Oh, I can.
he's
Yeah.
so unhinged and yet so restrained. And there is something so delicious about that in a movie, in a film piece, like he's got that camera right there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you see it really like in his face, how like all of the things that he's thinking about. So for me, the big takeaway is like, okay, how to be big with body and also with face, but also um, telegraph inner thought, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and he's just like that part is so great when he's up there talking, to all those men in the audience. And also it was a very funny thing to watch again after all these years and be like, oh my God, this whole like men's rights movement type shit,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah.
holy man, that was like before that really,
No,
really kicked off.
PTA was way ahead on that in
Woo!
terms of yeah.
Um, but his intensity and then again, kind of with this influencer stuff or whatever, all of it, the speakers and all of that.
Well, I mean, that whole part of that movie is about meeting that guy as the image and then just deconstructing down and down and down until, I mean, the heartbreaking scene of him with his, I mean, that's, I think, the best acting Cruise has ever done.
Oh, I
Really.
agree.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan, to be honest, but like,
See, I am a big fan,
yeah.
but I do feel like, and I love the Mission Impossible and stuff like that, but it is like, I know he can do that. And there are other, times throughout his career, especially early, when he was like, yeah, this guy, if he wants to, is one of the best actors. And talk about a guy who understands how to act on film specifically.
Right. He knows how to work a camera. He
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And that's another aspect of that performance that I really, really appreciated because, yeah, he's on a stage, but the angles that the cameras are at made me kind of think a little bit more about the types of gestures that I wanted to use
Yeah.
and the types of like power poses and things like that you would use. Because like, acting 101, you go into a room and the teacher's like, all right, we're going to do a game and it's all about status play, and like, all right, you're on the floor and you're standing above them. Who's in charge? That
Yeah.
sort of thing, like
Yeah.
basic stuff, but when it gets used correctly, it's so powerful, and can be really nuanced. And people, again, like the sound thing, you don't notice it, but it affects you,
Right.
so yeah, that performance was really fun to watch and rewatch
Well,
again.
and that whole movie, you talk about a movie that's just doing its own thing. Like it's, I also get that a lot if you talk to people about it. I remember that coming out and my dad just being like, I was with it till it started raining frog. That doesn't.
People get so hung up on the raining frogs.
Really, that's the big thing. And I remember that was so much of the discussion at the time was like, oh, this is like 2/3 the best movie of the year. And then it makes no sense at the end,
I feel like there's a lot of movies that I love where that's what's said about it, and I just have to go, well,
I don't know. Yeah, I think that. I mean, I do think it's interesting that we talked about Severance earlier, and that is really popular. I don't know. There's a line that I feel like the mainstream audience is willing to like. We'll get this weird, but not that weird.
Yeah.
It's like there's a whole thing about and Paul Thomas Anderson is a guy who certainly has just leaps back and forth over that line.
Because he can do the very like weird enough, but not too weird.
Oh yeah, a lot of his stuff. Magnolia was where it was like that tipped over the line for a lot of people. But I do hear more and more people like you and I are talking about like I every once in a while I do hear somebody be like, that's like the best one he did. Which I don't know if that's my opinion, but it's certainly in the conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I think about a lot because of like the performances and because of the weirdness of it. And yeah, I mean, I also love like Punch Drunk and
yeah,
but he also just does so many different things. That's kind of an inspiration in general, like somebody who doesn't stick to one particular.
Yeah,
it's him. It's his stuff. It's always his. You don't question, is this a movie that he's done? But they're not the same, and I'm always in awe of that. Well, and I try to do that sort of thing in my own art. Like, I'm not going to always do this one thing,
right. But it's recognized. It's, that's the thing I think people get hung up on is like having a voice in something doesn't mean you're staying within the same genre necessarily. Or even, but yeah, there's no doubt when you're watching one of his movies. So let's talk about a little bit. I want to talk about the show you're doing. I mentioned it in the intro and where people can get tickets and stuff like that, but tell me about what this show is, how you came up with it, and things like that.
My show's called HR, The Final Directive. Mm-hmm. And basically what it is it's it's a meeting and a PowerPoint presentation that you are required to come to. So basically it's part clown, it's part immersive, and totally corporate approved. There is a character that I've come up with, lovingly called HRD, HR director, who is there to basically onboard you into the rest of your life. The audience is a part of the show. Doesn't mean that you have to like be in the show. If you want to be, there's an opportunity.
That's good. I know a lot of
but
people
you don't have to be in it, but you are a part of it.
I know so many people who are like, I won't even come if there's a possibility I'm going to be involved in this thing. Yeah.
No, but ultimately what I mean by that is like the audience is being spoken to. So again, like going to, some sort of like TED Talk or motivational speaker. That's basically what this is, right? It's a presentation for you, the audience. And as time moves on, you as audience member realize that you are actually an employee. And there are different ways that you are going to find out that you are an employee and what type of employee you are and what that means for you. And ultimately that your final directive is that you must rejoin the company or else. So like I said earlier, it's a little bit of like corporate horror in the sense that, like we talked about, similar to Severance, there's no blood or slashing or necessarily like terrifying looming monsters or anything like that. It's just all capitalism, baby, and corporations running our lives, things like that. My hope is that everyone will find something that is familiar and feel mortified. Whether it's in the PowerPoint presentation or whether it's in one of the get to know you games that we play, or whether it's just in the observation of my character as the HR director, who, as you will find out as you watch the piece, is also not exactly who they seem and is also struggling as well. and possibly terrified. So there's a lot of layers to it. But overall, if you just want to come see like a weird ass PowerPoint presentation by somebody dressed in corporate clown, it's for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, you had me at corporate clown.
There's been friends over the years, and I know there are many actors who do that, who go into corporations and they have to do like trust falls and shit and teach people improv to like get everyone to know each other, and it sounds like the biggest nightmare.
No,
and
I've never done any of that, but they all I know stand-up, so it's like come do the corporate. Oh, I couldn't even begin to imagine that.
Yep. So there's a little bit of a lot of it actually comes from all of the things that I personally am terrified, which is working for corporate, having to completely press down who I am, but also willingly, because I don't necessarily want, so-and-so from accounting to know that I also do performance art,
Right.
I just want to order my checks on time, and not have to talk about it. I don't need to mix my worlds. I don't.
That's always that nightmare where it's just the amount of times that I've been like, you do comedy? I'm like, yeah, you're not funny. Like, well, I'm not funny here in this dentist's office or whatever. But why would I be? Yeah, I don't know.
What am I supposed to be on right now?
Like, just like I don't. Yeah, I love the like. I don't see it.
I don't see it. Yeah, no. Yeah. So there's a lot of the things that I'm terrified of in it, and I think a lot of things that I think your average person is terrified of. When I talk about it to people, there's always something different that they respond to. Some people, if I just say the word PowerPoint presentation, they're like, "Oh yeah, let's do it." Like, okay, cool. You're into that. That's great. I will say, I did not realize how intricate I was going to get with my PowerPoint presentation. It did really start off with just me thinking that it was going to be a very like I was going to see if I could buy one like that was already pre-made, and just fill it in. Right. And then I was just going to insert a bunch of like terrifying things. That's where it kind of started, because I thought that would be interesting. Nope. Instead, I have spent 3 months creating a literal Google slide presentation with so many animations.
Hey, if that's not enough reason for people, look at the amount of work she has put into this. If that's not enough reason to go right now and buy tickets, I don't know what is.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, definitely check it out. And it's only an hour, so it's not a huge commitment. And
that's
it's
big.
Part of
in today's world of super long run times, that's a huge selling point.
Yeah, it's fun, and
that's awesome.
You will walk away with something. I don't know what, but something.
Very cool.
And you'll see me absolutely embarrass myself, which is always fun to see. And I'd say buy tickets online, which, like you said, you will provide.
We'll have that in the video and then in the information below.
Perfect. Yeah, I think the price is higher at the door, so you might want to get them online.
Get them now. So. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mishelle, thanks so much for doing this. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We don't get a lot, we're in this ensemble show. I don't really get to talk to many people in the show one-on-one, despite the fact we've been doing the show for years together.
I know, because when you rehearsal, you got to do rehearsal stuff.
Yeah, it's like beyond the occasional, like, blah, 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 in between, and then the director yells at us to stop talking, because
he needs to keep talking.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. He's the director. No, we love our director, of course. But, so thanks so much for doing this, like I said. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Of course, it was fun. I love talking about art in whatever way.
There you have it, my conversation with the very creative Mishelle Apalategui. Once again, you can see her in HR, the Final Directive.